Hi guys, my name is Sophie Farrow. I will be doing my issue 2 project on the economical impacts of drought on the US beef industry. This is primarily relating to areas that are sort of in the western region of the United States, states like Nevada, California, New Mexico, and then the western part of Montana. These areas are being really heavily affected by drought right now. So I think that this is really a prominent issue in the beef industry right now. So to start off, what is a drought? So ultimately, a drought is the result of a prolonged period of time where little to no precipitation falls, which ultimately results in an area having an overall water shortage. So if you look over to the upper left photo, actually the right, this is a really good example of how you can predict drought conditions. This photo was taken in Nevada, and it was originally a reservoir for a sheep farm, but as you can see, the water level has greatly decreased. So ultimately, lack of adequate precipitation decreases groundwater, which can be shown in this photo of the reservoir right here, which then results in crop damage. When there's not enough rainfall to naturally produce crops, irrigation systems must be utilized, which is far less effective than regular or natural precipitation measures. The decrease in crop productivity poses great financial losses for beef operations in drought affected regions. So, those areas that we were talking about before, Nevada, California, Montana, and then I will show you a map later on in the presentation that shows some more areas out there that are being really heavily affected. And then droughts are often associated with above average temperatures that also affect crop sustainability. So, extreme climate changes will also dictate what crops you can grow at a certain time of the season. And then overall, the public opinion is that the current drought period only affects human potable water resources, when in actuality, it more heavily affects the entire US agricultural industry. So as I was saying before, there's actually a really great tool that you can use to monitor drought conditions. A lot of farmers use this website or software system called the US Drought Monitor. Some screenshots I've posted here on the right side. And essentially it's just an international tool to monitor drought conditions and drought fluctuations over prolonged or short periods of time. I have it national right here, but actually you're able to look at conditions in areas like Mexico and Brazil right now too, which is really interesting. But as you can see from this photo right here, areas in Nevada and New Mexico have been in D4 conditions for almost 3 years. Over at the legend right here, D4 is considered exceptional drought. There's also short-term and long-term labeled impacts, which both these areas that I was talking about previously are in long-term impacts right now. So these are typically greater than 6 months and that have both hydrological and ecological negative effects. And as said before, this US Drought Monitor is used by a lot of ranchers to predict drought trends. And new evidence shows complete lack of ecological stability in areas that are in D4 conditions. So essentially meaning that there's no predictability on what crops you can actually grow. And then in 2012, the USDA declared greater than 2/3 of the entire US region drought disaster areas. These are areas where you can't sustainably grow any sort of feed crops for the US livestock industry. So ultimately, the issue at a glance is that no rain equals no feed for cows. The location that I'm kind of focusing on primarily in my paper is Nevada, just because of the extreme state of which the drought is in right now. So overall, Nevada is primarily a naturally desert land. However, rain or precipitation dictates level of snowpack in the Sierra Nevada. The snowpack in the Sierra Nevada is essentially the source of water storage that feeds rivers, ponds, and reservoirs, and then also the entire Nevada agricultural industry. So mountain runoff supplies the water for grass and alfalfa production needed for Western US cattle operations. And this issue of drought poses a major financial threat to the Western US beef industry due to the requirement of ship feeds or implementation of irrigation systems. Since they can't grow their own feed there right now without water, they're having to ship it in from other areas. Nevada is currently in its 3rd year of extreme drought conditions. California, which is also a major beef contributor and also dairy, is on its 4th year. And then Montana switches between 3 and 4. The lack of outdoor forage in Nevada forces affected farmers to produce third-party feed product instead of growing their own or purchasing in-state product. So the in-state product could be produced through use of irrigation systems, which is also really, really expensive. So a lot of farmers in Nevada right now are just switching to out-of-state feed product. And then expected feed alternatives imposes smaller herd sizes. So if farmers in Nevada are choosing to switch to feed alternatives, this can include distillers grain, hay, protein blocks, molasses blocks, those are expensive, and therefore they need to utilize smaller herd sizes so they don't have to have such a wide variety of feed or animals that are in high maintenance. And then a recent study, this was posted in Beef Magazine where I originally found this problem, but it was a study done by Utah State University, found that the cattle inventory in the entire US in drought conditions decreases by 0.98 or almost 1.1% after or immediately following a drought period, and then an additional 0.36% after 1 year, and then 0.1% following each of those years, which doesn't seem like a vast amount, but there's almost 1 million cattle, I think, in the US right now. So if you look at those numbers and calculate the percentage, it's a really high head count. So although we're talking a lot about how drought financially affects farmers, it also implies a lot of financial consumer threats in affected regions as well. So researching this, I found sort of 3 more prominent issues. And the first one is that beef prices are soaring. This is due to the shipment of grain, alfalfa, and hay to Western cattle operations, and that's really expensive. So it forces farmers to charge more for their beef products. And then feed costs are the result of drought and tight feed market over the last half decade. Prolonged drought instances imply continuous increase of feed costs, making beef a more expensive commodity and thus not accessible to many citizens. And then I was recently watching a news report on like KBJR Las Vegas. I think it was like on the ABC News channel. But in June of 2021, local restaurants, and then in my paper, I think it was actually 10% of local restaurants in Las Vegas were forced or attempting to reduce beef options on their menus due to high rise in meat prices resulting from this drought in Nevada. And then in the Western region of the United States, tenderloins and ribeye prices are currently at a record high. So ultimately, how can farmers and ranchers combat economic losses and drought conditions? Drought is the leading generation of production risk in the US crop industry. According to Beef Magazine, it also is the #1 factor for decreased herd sizes in the US right now, and more significant than flooding, early frost, and invasive pests. The most common method for farmers to combat financial losses in drought conditions is to reduce their losses in a drought by reducing their herd size. This can include culling open, low producing, or lake having cows. Also, a huge method is selling cow calf pairs early on in the year as well. And then utilizing feedlots, selling calves at younger ages, and rationing low quality feed for animals at early weaning or early to mid pregnancy. These are animals that are ultimately going to be in lower maintenance and require less feed. Forage supplementation can also be utilized, although we talked about that before, it's really expensive. This can include range cubes, molasses blocks, grain byproducts. These byproducts could be like corn, soybean meal mixes, soy hulls, citrus pulp, cottonseed, and distillers grains. So overall, the US beef industry is at a huge financial risk under current drought conditions. While many water protests aim to protect human drinking water sources, it's imperative that we continue to find solutions to assist farmers in coping with drought-associated losses. These losses include feed. The best way for affected farmers and ranchers to combat the financial effects of drought is to reduce herd numbers and or reduce feeding operations to a bare minimum. That includes culling any low-performance animals or animals at high maintenance. Regions under extreme drought do not just financially affect beef farmers, but beef consumers as well. Thanks for watching.